In this video, The Bible is Theology, we're going to begin our study of Genesis chapter 1 by looking at the book of Genesis as polemical literature. Yeah, sounds exciting, doesn't it? Note my sarcasm there. But we're going to look at Genesis as polemical literature. Because remember, as we mentioned in our first video on the intro to Genesis, before we begin studying the book of Genesis, we need to understand why the book was written, for what end, and for what purpose. So today, we're going to examine in our video the apologetics of Genesis. As we begin, we need to remember Genesis was not written to be a history of the world, nor was it intended to be the world's first science book. Rather, Genesis in context was in part written as a polemic. Now, what is a polemic? Why do I keep saying that? In short, a polemic is a strong attack or argument against something. Well, why didn't you just say that? Well, so if polemical writing is attack or an argument against something, we need to ask ourselves, what or who was Moses arguing against? And that may be where things differ from our perspective. You see, Moses was arguing against the godhead of the pagan deities of the ancient Near East. And by arguing against these gods, he was also refuting the culture and practices of the ancient Near East. So we need to realize in Genesis, Moses is not arguing against evolutionists, but rather he was arguing against something even more devastating. He was arguing against the unholy belief system of the world. We need to understand that Genesis is a strongly critical assault by Moses on these pagan gods, the priest, and the religious beliefs and practices of the ancient world. This is the big overarching theme of the book, the attack against the gods. You see, Moses was arguing against polytheism and religious practices that we today sometimes have no problem thinking are just kind of foolish or silly, ignorant, or just downright, that's deplorable. That's disgusting, the things they do. But in context, yes, in context, which is king, queen, the big key of all study, we need to understand that to the children of Israel who were about to cross into the promised land, these rituals, these detestable practices were part of the fabric of the culture of the time. They were part of the fabric of the culture that they were entering into. They were part of the fabric of the culture their parents and grandparents left behind in Egypt. So just like today, the church is dealing with issues and evils like institutional poverty, violence, consumerism, sexual promiscuity, abortion, racism, pride, and progressive moral compromise. These are sins of the flesh which affect our relationship with God and, well, other fellow believers. So what we need to understand is that the children of Israel, in context of their setting, were dealing with issues which were just as real to them. And upon further review, not entirely different than what we deal with. You see, it's all about which kingdom and system you choose to submit to. And Moses is showing and arguing that the way of God is superior. It's superior to Asherah. It's superior to Baal. It's superior to Ra. Yes, the way of Yahweh is superior, even though sometimes his way may be more subtle and more mysterious. You see, we've got to remember, Genesis 1 is not a book written in a vacuum. This audience, the book was written to, is the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel, who under Joshua's leadership is entering this pagan land, a land with all sorts of different and sometimes deviant cultural practices. So Genesis is written as a defense against these polytheistic pagan cultures. Genesis is written to show Yahweh's superiority over the other gods. Now, the rest of the Exodus and the Torah, we see this played out as well. But Genesis is significant in that it is structured to show God's superiority over the other gods of the ancient Near East, starting with the creation narrative. In the Genesis creation narrative, we will see how Yahweh is superior to other gods. You might sit back and say, how? Well, by showing how Yahweh created the universe and how the way he created the cosmos contrasts with how the other gods supposedly created the cosmos. And because of this, this is where Moses is very creative and very smart. And this is where he starts. He starts with the creation of all things. Genesis 1, 2 to 3 is Moses' attack on the creation accounts of the gods and of the cultures of the ancient Near East. Now, if interested in seeing how Genesis 1 is a polemic against those specific gods and those creation accounts, there is another video in the deeper dive section for this week's videos. In that video, it will take some time detailing how Genesis 1 stands in stark contrast to the other cultures of the ancient Near East. For those of you that want a little bit deeper understanding, this will help you to better understand that Jesus was not written to us directly, but rather to the children of Israel as they prepare to enter this land with all these crazy ideas about these crazy gods, a land that is filled with many unholy and downright ridiculous practices. You see, it was written to them. But we also have to remember when looking at Genesis 1, it was written to them, but it's for us as well. Because what we have to pull out is the theology. There is much great theology and implication we can mine from Genesis chapter 1 as we continue through this. It's the theology that we're interested in. It's the theology that we need to unpack. It's the theology that can change our life. Suffice it to say, understanding that this chapter is written to a particular enemy in mind, the gods of the ancient Near East, will help us keep that in mind. As we do this, we will begin to see from the outset that Moses and his theology of Yahweh is set to turn the world upside down.